Hello, so you want to hear about one of the most extravagant showmen this century has to offer us? Well, his story, much like his music, is out of this world.
Shut the fuck up!
Terrible. Anyways, let's cut to the chase. Sir Elton Hercules John, in a nutshell, is a pianist, composer, fashion icon, activist, humanitarian, husband, father, godfather. Oh my god, he's everything. He's even a sir. He was knighted for Christ's sake. I have been a fan of Elton John about 12 years now, after my 12-year-old self discovered that Crocodile Rock and Circle of Life were written by the same man. Clears throat well, musically written, but we'll get to that now. You, what the kids call, an OG Elton fan? Have you been a fan since the dawn of Elton's career in the 60s? Or are you a new fan in their still zygote stage and are ready to sell their soul to his music? Well, honey, you got a big storm coming, because there is a lot to cover, 72 years of it, so if I leave out anything or cut corners, just remember, I don't want to keep you for 72 years, just as much as I don't want to keep writing for 72 years. Without further ado, let's give you all a crash course in our favorite Rocketman, or as one of Bernie's exes had affectionately known him as, the Bitch. Yes, that's where his song The Bitch Is Back stemmed from, born to the name of Reginald Kenneth Dwight. Little Reggie came into this world on the 25th of March, 1947. He was raised in Pinner, Middlesex, England, by his two parents Stanley Dwight and Sheila Eileen Harris. While together, both of his parents were collectors of music records that probably exposed Lil Reggie's ear to music. His father was even a slightly famous trumpet player for the Bob Miller Band. Regardless of this, Reg and his father had a tough relationship. Now serving for the Air Force, his father tried his best to steer Reggie away from music to more practical jobs, while just also being often neglectful and absent in his life. The relationship with his father and the later separation of his parents found it to have greatly affected Elton's psyche throughout his life. He also has noted this relationship to be one of the main reasons why he dressed up during his performances, aside from not being happy with his overall appearance. But we'll unfortunately get to that a little bit later. Going on to more of a happier note, Reg was making a name for himself as a talented pianist. He got a scholarship to the Royal Academy of Music and started to earn money playing at the local pub, and formed a band with friends called Bluesology, where they would back a number of touring American R&B and soul artists. While an amazing musician, Reginald felt that he couldn't write his own songs, so he responded to an ad posted by Ray Williams, who was the manager for the company Liberty Records. Little did Reg know that a lyricist had also responded to the same ad. That lyricist, you guessed it, was Mr. Bernie Taupin. I'm going to stop here for a second and talk about Bernie for a hot minute. I really commend Elton for bringing light to Bernie as much as he can, because in all honesty, this man could go into his own career if he had wanted to. He did a couple of solo albums that are an absolute pop.
Sunset sees man rest on a chartered isle. Mama cooks fresh fish on a driftwood fire. Oh, he's early rise when the sky lights Barcelona. I'm not a jungle son, I got rum soaked hooked to line and a cauldron.
He is an artist through means of words and visual expression, as he is also a contemporary painter and designer. I actually went to a show of his this past November, and here are some clips of it. Again, all the concerts, and when I say all, I mean two. Been two of Elton's. He has always credited Bernie as being the person who made Elton John, and honestly, he's not wrong. Bernie is powerful anyways. After being given Bernie's lyrics in an envelope, Reg found music in Bernie's writing and would write melodies to them. Melodies that would prove to be timeless, as both he and Bernie would form an artistic partnership for currently over more than half a century. I haven't even heard of marriages lasting that long, so for a little while, they wrote for other artists until they both produced their first album, Empty Sky. This is usually debated amongst fans because the album was not released outside of the UK until the mid-70s, but yes, it was his first complete album with Bernie. But here, ladies and gentlemen and all in between, is the most important part. This was when Reg decided to change his name to Elton John. Both of the names came from members of his Bluesology band, Elton Dean, their sax player, and their lead vocalist, Long John Baldery, who amazingly enough, voiced Dr. Robotnik from the original Sonic cartoons. Just know whenever you hear that meme now, you're hearing the man responsible for Elton's stage name.
Snooping as usual, I see.
Speaking of well-known media icons, did you know that James Newton Howard, the composer for the Dark Knight movies, was once a part of Elton's band too? I heard about that maybe 3 years ago and I was shook. but not because of The Dark Knight but because he also composed for Disney's Dinosaur. Look, even though it's a terrible movie, the music is literally gorgeous and majority of what I listen to when I do storyboards. Anyways, so here we are finally to where most have been introduced to Elton, as his first hit Your Song came in at number 7 on the UK charts and number 8 in the US. The album's first single, Border Song, gained traction as it was covered by an American soul artist, Aretha Franklin. So this was where their dreams really became a reality, as Elton and his band, Nigel Olsson and Dee Murray, made their way to America to perform. The groundbreaking night of the 25th of August officially changed Elton's life, as he played at the Troubadour to a crowd that consisted of so many well-known artists, such as Neil Diamond and Leon Russell, one of Elton's biggest inspiration. Could you ever imagine performing knowing that one of the people whom you have looked up to so much in your life is watching you? I honestly don't know how people like Elton do it, but it proved to be a highlighted huge success that then president of Uni Records said that he couldn't come down after the high he got off of the excitement of that night from Elton's performance. The following day they decided to go to Disneyland to celebrate before their next show. Elton came back with Mickey Mouse hat and said he was going on stage with them, which was probably the start of his infamous stage attire at that point. For what seemed like overnight, Elton became a huge sensation in the US and pretty soon the world, so because the 70s gets kind of muddled. Please bear with me as I try and get through these points individually. There was a time where it seemed like Elton had ruled the world. One of the greatest examples was him being one of the only Western performers to play in the Soviet Union in the 70s. Because of government restrictions of that time, Elton couldn't go over extravagant as he usually did at that time, so both he and Ray Cooper came in and did a show solely based on the music alone. It honestly was one of my favorite performances I've ever heard by him. It also drove Russian crowds hella wild that officials had to come in and calm them down despite his success. Elton saw himself in a lot of lows in the 70s. Let's talk about a huge Elton's sexuality. When Elton was in his 20s, he had a girlfriend whom was planning to settle with him, as he tossed around with his preferences. This led Elton into a dark place, to the point where Bernie and Long John had saved him from taking his life, thus inspiring the song Someone Saved My Life Tonight. Now, I love that song, but being subliminally hit like that in a song is one of the biggest yikes I think I ever felt. He then broke off the engagement and started seeing behind closed doors his manager at the time, John Reid. While at first a mutually loving relationship, between fighting back demons and the start of Elton's drug addiction, their relationship had soured and grown toxic. Now I've tried to not bring up the film Rocketman at all in this rundown, because as you could probably tell from all that I've said already, there is a lot of Elton's life that was either changed or left out altogether, which I'm personally fine given that the movie labels itself as a musical fantasy. But one thing that I'm going to say is that this movie was all based on Elton's perspective. Trust me, I have researched for years on both John and Elton's relationship to get a sense of a side, until I realized there's no place for me to take a side. I'm not saying that Reid wasn't a huge dick at times, and I'm not saying that Elton wouldn't get nasty either, but what really went on in their relationship is between both Elton and Reid. A lot of why we don't know about them either was the stigma around being gay at that time and kept it hidden. Elton came out as bisexual in the later 70s but then married his sound Chinchin Renata Blall as seemingly a cover-up in the mid-80s. In a not so long-lasting marriage, this constant shift of emotions led Elton down a long path of drinking and drugs, so much so that it impacted him and his performances into the 80s. He would go into loud outbursts and rages. He even threw Ray Williams into a hotel pool after a heated argument. There's even a documentary that his later husband David Furnish would make called Tantrums and Tiaras that would showcase his episodes and lulls afterwards.
Fucking person leave my fucking clothes in the car. What the fuck's going on? I don't give a fuck. I make music. I don't fucking make film. I hate fucking videos. There are fucking loads of them. And I tell you this, I am not doing this video.
It's definitely an interesting watch. He would be so high on stage at times that he would forget the lyrics to his own songs, even incredibly miss up on a couple of his piano notes. That's when you know shit's fucked. His songs were even hitting a critical low unlike the previous decade. Then, Bernie left him for a while to work with other artists. It was at this point that Elton hit a huge low in himself. But as the 80s decade came to a close, so did Elton's patience on his own bullshit. A lot of what did there was a young man by the name of Ryan White, who contracted the AIDS disease through a blood transfusion. In an effort for recovery, Elton helped the White family until Ryan passed away in 1990. Being inspired by Ryan's fight throughout the last half of the decade, Elton checked himself into rehab and later started his famous AIDS Research Foundation that now is supported by numerous celebrities and has helped the efforts against fighting the disease that has taken Ryan and many of his close friends, such as the well-known and respected Queen frontman Freddie Mercury. The 90s became a huge turning point in Elton's life, as this was the decade where he became sober, met the love of his life David Furnish, and also created my all-time favorite album of his, The One. Sorry, I got to throw in that personal note, but seriously, that album made me become an artist. First of all, it's bougie as fuck, because the cover was designed by Versace, but I swear to God, if you think the cover is pretty, listen to the music inside. More importantly, the title track. That's the song that made me an Elton fan at age 12, my dudes. Anyways, this was also the decade where his name really shot up in musicals, while he contributed to a lot of other movie tracks, like a movie called Friends in the 70s and a strange ass movie called Tommy. Elton got tied into Disney for his most notable role in the 90s, in The Lion King, where he won a couple of Grammys for. He also wrote the music for the Broadway play, Aida, which as a side note, I read the playwright for as a 5th grader, aka before I registered who Elton John was, and absolutely love it, so I honestly don't know where my love for this man began. You might also know him from The Road to El Dorado, which I honest to God forgot they made him animated in that one music video, and that made me bust a gut over how cheesy and wonderful it is. And Billy Elliot, a musical adaptation of a 2000 film of the same name about a boy who had a story very much similar to Elton's, which is probably why it flows so well. Fun fact, did you know the actor that played Billy in the 2000 film acted as Bernie Taupin in Rocketman? I was wondering why they didn't get Daniel Radcliffe as Bernie, as some was speculating, but I loved Jamie Bell's performance as Bernie. Honest to God, smitten. In more recent examples, both he and his husband David made a movie series called Gnomes that references a lot of his hits, and the most well-known example, Sing, where Taron Egerton covered I'm Still Standing as his character, and was taken notice by Elton. Who knew that 3 years later, he would be not just covering Elton's discography, but living it too? Honestly, going off about for a minute, in complete honesty, I was one of those people who didn't think that this movie was going to be good. Taron's performance literally makes this entire film. I am now a Taron stan after this film. I absolutely love him and his self-proclaimed big butt. Bitch me to the fuck anyways. So this was a lot. I would love to talk about so much more than this, such as my favorite looks and music by him, but maybe that will be a separate video. But for now, I welcome all Elton fans new and old to talk about this man, and I'm just going to say this because I've seen it all over these forums. If you are a fetus listening to Tiny Dancer for the first time or were breastfeed from Elton in the 60s, it really doesn't matter here or shouldn't matter to anyone, because as many people would probably say, Elton's music transcends across many generation. Hell, not to flex, but I've been retweeted by the man twice, so I've basically achieved Lady Gaga status. Yes, Elton, I would happily be the godmother to your children. Anyways, my gift is this horrible editing, and this one's for you. Goodbye.